It's so great to be doing this presentation at RVML again. I've done a number of presentations here at the library over the course of the years, and to have so many familiar faces and to just have been in this town for so many years, and it's touching to see you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining me. Yeah. Okay, so my name's Nando Raynolds. I'm a local psychotherapist. I've been doing this here in the Rogue Valley for 35 years, and I work primarily with adults and couples. Welcome, and my other I've got two other hats. One other hat is I work as a movement instructor, and so I teach Tai Chi and Qigong, and Fran's taking my online Qigong class, and she's a longtime student. Really appreciate you coming. And then my other hat is I work with clay, and some of you I've met at the Clay Folk Festival that happens in the fall, and you've seen my pottery and like that. And I've got clay under my fingernails. I was pulling handles for mugs this afternoon, and so today I got to do my Qigong in the morning, and then see clients over the course of the day, and do my pottery as well. And so to get to do all three of those in a day is pretty damn cool. So that's great. So yeah, next on this. And so today what we're going to be talking about is how to upgrade we called it how to upgrade your personal operating system so that you get better results, so that you're more personally effective. And my idea is that if we can use ourselves more effectively, we're more effective at creating our goals and achieving our dreams. So that's the plan, okay? And this is based on a map that I created decade and a half ago called the 7 keys. And those 7 keys are just like, if you want to have a balanced life, you need to pay attention to these 7 things. And if you pay methodical attention to these 7 things, you can have a pretty functional life. So the first one is balanced self-care, self-understanding and mindfulness, freedom from your past, self-empathy, nourishing relationships with others, an inspiring personal vision with concrete goals, and then a meaningful spiritual life. And if you've got all 7 of those, working pretty well, you're going to have a good life. Okay, so the next one. And so I'm just going to go through these 7 pretty quickly here to start with, but the notion is that if you have these 7 sorted out in your mind, then you can create a plan. And you can look at yourself and you can go, oh, well, I'm a little, not firing on all cylinders over here. And so we later at the end of the night, I've got a handout here that has this is the 7 keys in a circle here with the whole explanation and yada yada. And just make sure that you get one of these before you leave, okay? Yeah, okay, and next. And so this first one, balanced self-care, has these 8 different elements. So if we're going to have balanced self-care, if I'm going to be functional in my life, I need to have my body functional, right? And if my body's not functional, I'm not really going to be able to do much. So I have to pay attention to my diet, sleep, exercise, right? And then we go to relaxation, social connection, avoiding addiction. Addiction can be defined as any mood-altering behavior that has life-damaging consequences. Any mood-altering behavior that has life-damaging consequences. Yeah, I do that stuff too. So it's like it's not like no addictions, right? It's like, manage your relationship with Netflix, right? Do you spend too much time on your telephone? What's up with that? I mean, we're not just talking about alcohol and gambling and sex and ice cream and whatever, right? Shopping. So avoiding addiction, and then medical self-care so that you're taking good care of yourself, and no self-harm. So, and self-harm, of course, you know, for Nando, it's like, I'm not cutting, but I am skiing, right? And I'm skiing pretty vigorously, and I'm going down rivers. So it's like no self-harm is related to risk, right? So, okay, so next. So as I say, I'm just going to run through these pretty quick. The second key is self-understanding and mindfulness. You have to have a map of what you're, you know, how you understand yourself, and then you have to have the ability to pay attention. And if you can pay attention and you kind of know what you're looking for, then you can identify things. It's a little bit like if you're a birder. Any birders here? Well, if you're a birder, you want to be able to identify the bird by just a flash. You know, it's like I just hear that, I just see the movement, and I can identify the bird. All right? So I don't want to have to like be so unfamiliar with my environment that I have to see the whole picture. I want to be so familiar with my environment that I don't have to see the whole picture. It's just I know what to expect. Okay, next. This pace okay? Because I'm just running through. So the next one is freedom from your past, and we'll talk more about this, but your brain saves energy by building habits. And anything that your brain can put on autopilot, it will. All right? So we just want to recognize that and make sure that you keep your habits upgraded. You've got to keep upgrading your habits. So you want to learn from your past, make sure that you're not on autopilot. Chances are, like, one way to think about a habit is a solution to a problem that worked before. Doesn't necessarily mean that it works now. It doesn't necessarily mean that the problem is actually what you're identifying it to be, right? We've had that experience, so I'm so habitually assuming that it's this kind of problem that I think it's that problem again, and it's something completely different. So we want to free ourselves from autopilot, build good habits and routines, and innovate so that we're actually in the present moment instead of on autopilot. So next on that. And then the fourth key is self-empathy. So most people, I wrote a book on this, transforming your inner critic into an inner coach, and if most people treat themselves so unkindly, they've learned to treat the rest of the world, other people, with respect and compassion, but they haven't necessarily internalized that. So most people have a pretty strong inner critic, and it's hard to learn if you're in a critical environment. You know, if you're in a critical classroom, it's hard to learn, and if you're in a critical environment inside, it's hard to learn. So self-compassion is really important. We need to be able to perceive our own experience. That's mindfulness again. Mindfulness incidentally is defined as the ability to pay attention through your five senses to the present moment with an attitude of Cole. Oh, we'll come back to that. I actually have a whole slide on that. So we'll come back to that. But we need to be able to perceive our experience, convey understanding to ourselves, and validate our experience as legitimate. And if we don't do that, it's pretty hard to be patient. So, and then we bring empathy to all stakeholders, and the self-empathy, as you know, is going to help you maintain frustration in the face of inevitable setbacks. All right. Here you go. Next. And then the fifth key is nourishing relationships with others. And you know, the research, they did longitudinal research on this, and the happiest people were the people who had good relationships. Okay? So good relationships are the root of personal happiness, and good relationships arise through the consistent and persistent application of learnable skills. We treat other people with respect. We actually listen to them. We convey understanding. We validate their experience, and we have skills at conflict resolution. And it's just, these are doable. They're skills, but they're learnable. And I can look at myself and I can go, well, Nando, you do have a little bit to learn about conflict resolution, don't you? And my wife can say, you know, some of that validation stuff, Nando, have you tried that? So it's like we're all a work in progress, right? But again, the value of this map is that it gives you the work in progress. It helps you understand, well, if I want to improve my life, if I want to take 5-10 minutes and do something that would actually be useful, what should I do? All right? So on to the next. The key 6 is inspiring personal vision and concrete goals. If you don't have a target, you're not going to get there. If you just sort of mill around in your life, you're unlikely to be satisfied. And to a degree, it doesn't even matter what your target is. All right? It's like some people have the notion. My parents, they sent me a cartoon that was, you know, like one of these Far Side type cartoons, and it was like, you know, Ernie finds his purpose, and he's pulling this gazingas pin out from underneath the pillows in the sofa, right? You know, so he's got this weird gizmo that he's pulling out from that was lost in the sofa, and it's like Ernie finds his purpose. Well, and the reality is that you know, one perspective is that God created a purpose for you, and your mission is to discover that purpose. That is going to lead to serious distress. Okay? Yeah. On the other hand, if you think, wow, you know, part of the way that I create meaning in my life is to make choices about what my purpose is. What is it that I'm actually trying to do? Now that can actually lead to a happy life. Right? So, inspiring personal vision and concrete goals. And ideally, they're written down. Okay? And the next one. And key 7 is having a meaningful spiritual life. And, you know, people have different, totally different ideas about what that means. And so I'm not here to say, oh, well, you know, you need to do it this way. But it is valuable to recognize that spirituality has 4 elements. Spiritual connection is based on having a sensible cosmology, an idea about how the world works, and then a sensible idea about what virtuous action is, like what should I do? Maybe I should contribute to the well-being of others. You know? Virtuous action, mindfulness again, paying attention through your 5 senses to the present moment, and then state rehearsal. And there are religions that don't have one of these elements in the popular culture of that religion, which is why that religion is so hollow. Right? So you need to have cosmology, virtuous action, mindfulness, and state rehearsal. State rehearsal is like, oh, you know, it would be good to be able to deliberately move into a place where I felt connected with all beings. Would that be good? Right? Well, like, shouldn't we have a method for doing that in a functional religion? You know? So, okay. So that's key 7. Now we go on to the next. So we're focusing on key 2, which is mindfulness and self-understanding in order to update our personal operating system, okay? And the next. So the important piece about key 2 is that you can't be effective if you can't perceive what's happening or if you don't understand what's happening. All right? So we really need to be paying attention to both of those. Next. So the first one is mindfulness. And I think, Missy, if you hit this again, it gives me my little, there we go. Thank you. So mindfulness, again, this is John Kabat-Zinn's definition with an addition. So mindfulness is paying attention through your 5 senses to the present moment. And then Daniel Siegel adds, with an attitude of coal. And coal is compassion. It's curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. Acceptance and love. So curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. So I'm paying attention to the present moment through my 5 senses, but I'm doing it like, wow, I've got that open-hearted kind of way about it, as opposed to, right? So, okay, next. Now, mindfulness is really associated with flow. And maybe you're familiar with the research on flow and being in the zone, but being in the zone, being in flow requires instantaneous feedback from your environment. And so if you want to, like here, I'm doing this presentation, and in order for me to be like at my skill level, I'm paying close attention to your faces. Right? And I'm getting immediate feedback on whether this makes sense and whether my pacing is correct and whether Rob is just like unhappy in the back there. You know? And so I'm using that in order to help me stay in flow and stay out of presenter anxiety. All right? So it's like, okay, so mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment through your 5 senses, and setting up situations where you get to be in flow because it's so much more pleasant. All right? It just feels good. Next. So mindfulness is a skill, and one of the cool things about skills is that we develop them through rehearsal. If I want to be good at playing the guitar, it's impossible for me to be good at playing the guitar if I don't play the guitar. Right? It's impossible for me to be good at mindfulness if I don't actually practice being mindful. So one option is go to the ashram, do your sitting meditation practice, do all of that kind of stuff. But another option is just like, hey, when you're washing dishes, pay attention through your 5 senses to the present moment. All right? When you don't have to be thinking, I don't know about your experience, but in my world, I do have to think. I have to think about what I did in the past. I have to think about what I'm going to do in the future. I have to think about what this means and what my wife said and what my children said and what my plans are. I do have to think. But most of the time, I don't actually have to think. I don't have to do that analysis. Most of the time, I can just rest in my 5 sense perception and just use that to overwhelm my constant internal chatter. Any of you have constant internal chatter? Like monkey mind? You have any, okay? So it's like I deliberately use sensory rich experience to overwhelm that and keep me in the moment because I don't have to think all the time. It's exhausting to think all the time. It uses huge amounts of excess energy. Okay? And then, of course, we could do it as a daily practice and work on your mindfulness in that way. But we want to just recognize, 5 years from now, I'd really like to be better at paying attention to the present moment and being able to use that to swamp my chattering, unnecessary internal chatter. I spend a ridiculous amount of time going over past events that I've already gone over 7,000 times. How is that a useful use of energy? It's just so much better for me to be paying attention to, your smiles, your faces, the color of the books, the feeling in my body, my breath, anything than going over that rehearsal of like, oh, I can't believe I said that, or oh, you know, my mom said this to me when I was 10. Give me a break, right? Okay, next. So now mindfulness does train our attention, and you can think about your attention as like a flashlight in a dark room. And like I was saying about birding, I would like to be able to catch something out of the corner of my eye and know what it is. Okay? So I want to understand myself so well that I can catch something fleeting, something moving through over my awareness, moving through the flashlight of my awareness quickly, and I want to be able to know what it is. And that requires a fair amount of self-understanding. Okay, so now Dan Siegel has an interesting, you guys know Dan Siegel? He's written some wonderful books. Daniel Siegel, wonderful books on mindfulness, books on attachment-based parenting. He's probably a PhD and does research on the intersection between attachment, psychology, and counseling. And just really, I highly recommend him as an author. He's very readable and valuable material. Anyway, his idea is that we have, like, if you imagine your flashlight, or if you imagine a compass pointing to the north, yes, and so the compass could be pointing this way or this way or this way or this way. And he imagines the contents of our awareness as like the ring that's around the compass that it could be pointing to. And we can see how, oh yeah, our attention, we could be paying attention to this or this or this, right? I can pay attention to do this with me. You could pay attention to your left little toe. Holy cow, I have a left little toe. I had no idea a moment ago, right? But now it's like, oh yeah, well, no, it's actually on that side, isn't it? Okay, next. So in order to do the self-understanding, it's good to do an inventory of what the potential contents of your awareness is. Yeah? Okay? So the primary contents of awareness is the experience of being aware. And if you track the non-dual spiritual traditions, non-duality is all about go right there. Just go right to the experience of being aware. And so Adyashanti and various other people who do that non-dual awareness, that's the path. Highly recommend that. But within that, within the experience of being aware, you know, the only way that I know that I'm aware is that I'm aware of an object, yes? So any time that I'm aware, the Buddhists talk about this as being mutually co-arising. So the experience of awareness and the thing that you're aware of is mutually co-arising. And it is. So it's like whenever I turn on my five senses, which again, you know, the current psychological studies say, well, actually there are more than 20 senses, including proprioception, which is like where you feel your body in space, the experience of balance. Interoception is the ability to feel sensations inside your body, right? So it's like, you know, okay, well, sight, right? Vision, smell, hearing, taste, those are kind of like, oh, yeah, good with that. But then you start feeling, well, feeling has all of these other things in it, and it's all under that umbrella. But anyway, so we've got the experience of being aware and aware of an object, and the object at the base of that is always a sensation, and sensation then very quickly has attraction and aversion to it. right? Either I move towards what I perceive or I move away from it. Okay? So it's like I have my 5 sense awareness and I go, oh, isn't that beautiful? Or, wow, doesn't that garbage smell bad? Right? So that attraction and aversion, it happens really, really quick. That's the primary basis of awareness. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay? And then you'll see it even more as we go on. So the next one here, Missy. So as we go into these other contents of awareness, they're more abstract. And so then we have emotions. And emotions are physical sensations that we've become able to identify. So if you think about like a 1-year-old, does the 1-year-old have emotion? I'd say yes. Yeah, 1-year-olds have emotion, yes. Do 1-year-olds know that they're angry? No, right? So they have emotions, but they can't identify those emotions. Now, as adults, hopefully we can identify most of our emotions. But it's again, it's physical sensation that we've put a name on. And then imagery, self-talk, or feeling-based thought, you know, when I'm thinking in my 5 sense language. Most people think by visualizing, or by talking to themselves, or by having sensations in their bodies. And if you study the way that you think, you get this huge... If you study the way that you think, you get a huge amount of power, because you suddenly realize that you're thinking by talking to yourself, or you're thinking through imagery, or you're thinking by having physical sensations, or it follows a certain pattern. It gives you huge amounts of power over your own world. And then thoughts about the past and future and analysis of the present, right? And so when I'm be here nowing and in my mindfulness practice, right, I don't want to be here. I want to be back in my 5 sense perception and noticing attraction and aversion. And that's a really different state of consciousness. Okay, next. So even more abstract are these collections of ideas, right? Goals, preferences, beliefs about yourself and others, all this other stuff, right? But it's important, but it's just like if you imagine, you know, taking some sort of medication like 5-MeO-DMT, say, and going totally out, and then you come back in. Well, you come back in to the first level first, and then the second level, and then eventually you find yourself, your ego is reconstructed, and you have all of this other stuff going on, right? And so it's like important, but pretty abstract. And next. So I like this image because this is, you know, imagine that your body-mind system is an airplane, and imagine that you tape over a whole bunch of these gauges, right? And so you're just like, oh, well, I don't pay attention to that. I was raised not to pay attention to my anger, for example, and so I've taped over my anger gauge. Or I was raised not to pay attention to any time that I was offended by a man or a woman, and so I've taped over that gauge. Well, that's not going to work real well, right? It's really important to have your gauges, to have your information, your eyes open, so that you can take that information in. And then you can decide what to do. So poor self-awareness leads to poor performance. You tape these things over, you're not going to have a good flight. Right? Next. So the most difficult phase of life is not when no one understands you, of course, but that's what we think at the time. but it's really that we don't understand ourselves. And so if you think back on, like high school, I was clueless. And I felt so poorly understood by other people. But I just, I was clueless about what was going on for me. And I certainly couldn't articulate it to another human being. And so as a consequence, I couldn't have functional relationships. Normal, age appropriate. All right? Next. Okay, so now we're going to talk about brain hardware. Some of you know your brain hardware stuff in and out, and so we're going to run through the brain hardware stuff. This is stuff that is just like, this is your birthright, and it cannot be changed. Next. So we start with the triune brain. If any of you who have studied the brain at all, you know that we can divide it into parts. Right? We can say, oh, well, this is the neocortex, and this is the limbic system, and this is the reticular activating system, and da-da-da-da-da. So we have one way of thinking about that is that the brain stem is all of those automatic processes. And lizards have brain stems. And so they think about this as like, okay, this is your reptilian brain. It's all about instinct, right? And then we have the limbic system, which is higher. Now, mammals have limbic systems. And so dogs and horses have limbic systems. And they're really obvious in dogs and horses. They're very emotional creatures, right? And so very emotional, very much about social connection, particularly in humans. We're primate troops, right? That's how we want to function. And then we have the neocortex, and the neocortex is a more recent development in mammals. And we've got speech, logic, higher thinking skills. All sorts of other animals also have a cortex, have a neocortex. But we've got a more, we like to think of it as like more developed and all of that kind of stuff. How big is a blue whale's brain? I mean, it's like, right? But we're the smartest creatures on the planet. Right? But anyway, we have these parts in our brain, and one of the consequences of having parts in your brain is it's possible to have one thing happening in one part and another thing happening in another part. They may or may not be in sync. Okay? And the next. And then to complicate things, we have brain hemispheres. So we take those three layers and we chop them in half, and we go, oh, well, here's the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere is more about nonverbal, intuitive kind of stuff. Yeah?
Is there a division between the left and right in the limbic system as well?
I believe so.
Okay.
Is there?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. So I think so. I think it's like, I think it goes down to the reptilian brain. But anyway, the right hemisphere is, this is sort of pop science. That's not rigidly true. People vary about this. But generally, the right side of the hemisphere is less verbal, it's more intuitive, it's more imagery based, and the left side of the brain is where the speech centers are. And some of you may have read, there's this wonderful book called My Stroke of Insight, and where the neurologist is having a stroke, and she recounts the whole process of having the right side of her brain the left side of her brain completely shut down. And so like she lost all ability to verbalize and dissolved into the sea of awareness. Right? I mean, it was quite wonderful for her at the same time that she realized, wow, I could die of this. So, and she did a TED talk as well. It's wonderful. I love those kinds of things. Anyway, so we have 3 split down the middle. Now we got 6, right? And then next. And then we have electrical and biochemical thinking as well. I mean, it's really effing complicated. Okay? So the electrical system is fast, and that functions within the central nervous system. It's about axons and neurons, myelin. You know what myelin is? You know these coaxial cables over here? They're electrical cables that are sheathed in copper, and that makes the signal fast and not easily degraded. It reduces interference. And myelin is the same sort of thing. It's a fatty substance that coats the axons, the connections between your neurons, and it makes the firing faster and more harder to degrade. Okay? Anyway, so because of that, that's where our habits are. That's where our autopilot is. And the reactions can bypass the cerebral cortex, right? It can go straight to the amygdala. And you can be having this reaction to something before you can even recognize it. And it has a negative bias. The negative bias is really important to understand about the way that the brain works. Bears could kill you. Roses could not. Okay? So therefore, it's evolutionarily wise to pay more attention to bears than to roses. Makes sense? Okay? And so we tend to, because of that negative bias, it's really easy to access terrible things that have happened to you in the past. It's really easy to remember people who have slighted you and people who have offended you and things where you embarrassed yourself and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's actually harder to remember some of the particularly wonderful things. Well, that's not actually all that useful anymore. And it's something that you can take charge of. But you can only take charge of it if you recognize that it's an issue. All right? It's an issue. Anyway, biochemical stuff is slower. And it turns out that 1/3 of the neurotransmitters and hormones are produced here, but then 1/3 in the heart and 1/3 in the guts. And so there's a huge amount of biochemical thinking that's happening here and not here. Okay? They did this cool experiment. They took someone's brain case off and they stuck electrodes into the person's brain, right? And they stimulated the brain with electricity, and they found a place where they could poke this poor person where they would get pissed off. Okay? So they poked them here and turned on the electricity and gave them a little zap, and they got pissed. Okay? And then they turned it off and the person was fine, and they were just like, hey, no problem. And then they left it on for longer. And they left it on for longer, and it started to change the biochemistry. Right? It's a slower moving system. And then they turned the electricity off and the person was still pissed. Okay? So I'm sure you've had that experience. You get a little flash of something, of irritation, of fear, or something like that. But then it's gone. It was electrical. Right? And then there are other times where it's just grinding at you. Right? And that's biochemical. So, and then we've got the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, some of you may be familiar, there's a lot of, pop kind of poorly presented material on the vagus nerve, like, oh, you do this vagal nerve activation stuff and it's going to totally change your life. Not. Okay? So but the vagus nerve innervates the viscera and the spine. And the vagus nerve, when you're in fight or flight, the dorsal vagus nerve gets more stimulated, and when you're in, rest and repose and connecting to other human beings, all of this stuff in the front of your body gets activated. So one way to deliberately calm yourself down is to activate the front of your body. And you can activate the front of your body with movement and mobility, or with facial expression, or by softening your tone of voice, or all of that kind of stuff. And it just is going to put you in a sweeter state of consciousness. Or you can like, you know, get kind of rigid. I was a little bit rigid a moment ago, and so softening like this. It's a little bit, you know, that's good. Okay, and we have electrical and biochemical habits. Biochemical habits are moods, right? If any of you have had periods of depression or periods of like extended anxiety or like that, it becomes a biochemical habit. Okay? And so we just, you know, like the medical intervention for that is useful if you're in a really strong biochemical habit of being depressed, for instance. But I'm not recommending 24/7 Prozac for the rest of your life. Okay, next. This stuff is making sense, I hope. It's finding ways where it's like, oh yeah, right, Nando, I understand that. So, contents of awareness now. So we're talking about emotions, and emotions reveal attraction and aversion. They're feelings. They're based on kinesthetic experiences, and being able to pay attention to your emotions. Hey, Rob, you want one of these?
Yeah. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, no worries, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as I was saying, feelings are kinesthetic experiences. In order to pay attention to them, it requires interoception. It requires paying attention to your body. All right? And I've worked with clients who have had really grave difficulty identifying and processing their emotion because they don't pay attention. And generally, those people didn't pay attention to their actual internal sensations. They're just like they're busy paying attention to the external world, but the gauges that refer to their internal sensations have been taped over for whatever reason. And then it's really hard to know what you're feeling. And it's hard to make wise choices about your life if you don't know what you're feeling. It's hard to identify attraction and aversion. There are 5 primary difficult emotions. So this is helpful to know. The first 3, anger, sadness, fear. Right? Anger, sadness, fear. And then the second 2, they're sort of emotions about emotions, or they're emotions. First you have anger, sadness, fear, and then on top of that you have shame and loneliness. And very, very often we have mixes of these. Like if we were going to have primary colors, you know, and we think about creating hues and like that by mixing. So these difficult emotions, they're the same sort of thing, right? Anger, sadness, fear blended together with a little dollop of shame and some alienation to go with that. Let's make ourselves really miserable, right? Familiar? Okay. So anyway, useful, again, this is about the self-understanding piece. We did the hardware, which is like, oh, well, this is the way the brain works, and sorry, that's just the way your brain works. And then it's like we go back to this contents of awareness from that perspective, and it's like, oh, right, I want to understand some of these subjective details about how it is that I experience my life. Next. And there's an important relationship between emotions and mood. Emotions are like this. If this is time, right? So emotions are like this. They arise and they dissipate, and the clearest example of that is one of those electrical events, right? Where it's like the emotion arises and then it dissipates. And if you think about like the Dalai Lama or whoever your favorite saint is, that person has emotions, yes, right? But they return to center way faster than us. Okay? So it's not that the Dalai Lama doesn't get pissed about the Chinese in Tibet, right? How could he not get pissed? But he recovers very, very quickly. Okay? Mood, however, is where you have, again, this is time, the emotion arises and then you perseverate on it. All right? So it's like, oh, grumble, grumble, grumble. You know, this person pissed me off there, and I'm just like, this is how I'm self-righteous about that, and, you know, I'm just going to remain pissed for the next 10 years. All right? Not helpful. All right? So emotions are good because they're information about your world and your response to your world, and they give you information about attraction and aversion. Perseverating on them so you turn them into moods, not good. Don't recommend it. Okay? So I like to think about emotions as like, oh, there's some part of me bringing me a message. Fabulous! Thank you so much. I want to receive the message. And then I want to, it could be that the...
Your computer port is
just funking.
Yeah, it's going to, hold on, start again.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get it back for a second.
We're gonna like assume that that's gonna happen. I'm wondering if you need any extra power in there too. My computer might...
Maybe it's really that this port is a little
Hey,
loose.
look! It
Yeah.
worked again.
It's this has been
Oh, yeah.
the problematic thing. That's why we usually we'll talk about it later. But that's
Okay.
why we use this computer.
Could you
'cause it
try to
always
plug that
works.
in for me? Just so it... Yes. Thank you. Okay, so like I was saying, the emotions are like messengers, yeah? So they bring you a message, and then once you've received the message, ideally you like move on. You get the message and you move on. You don't like, oh, I'm going to read this message again and again and again and again and again. All right? So, okay. Could you do the next one? Thank you, Missy. So then when we're thinking about our brain software, remember, so we had the hardware. The hardware is all that stuff that you can't change, and software you can change. And so this is where it turns into your operating system. And an important part of looking at your operating system is there's implicit learning and habits and explicit learning and habits. Implicit learning and habits are those things that happen under your radar. Okay, so they happened when you were very young. They happen, they get under your radar. It's implicit. You're not even aware that you took on that worldview. Okay? And then there are explicit learning and habits, which I can detail to you because it's available to consciousness. So explicit habits I can mess with, I can change, I can decide, wow, you know, I have this habit of having a snack before I go to bed, you know, maybe it would be a good idea not to do that, and I can intervene and change that habit, right? But the implicit learning of like that, you know, well, we'll get there. So next, if you would. So one of the structures about the way that the brain works is that, remember, we had all of these different components to the brain and to the way that the mind works and all of that. And it's possible for them to be thinking different things at the same time. So it's possible for the right side of my limbic system to be having one worldview and the left side to be having another worldview, right? And so the subjective experience of that is that I have an internal committee. Okay? And that's perfectly normal. Everybody has an internal committee. It's really helpful if you identify that you have an internal committee and that you don't pretend that that's a problem. Because it's not a problem. It's normal. This goes with the territory. However, that leads to like, oh, wow, I've got an internal committee. So that leads to something. Yeah? I think about these parts, I call them subpersonalities. Some of you may be familiar with internal family systems, which is the latest incarnation of working with different subpersonalities in psychotherapy. but these are different habits, they're different stakeholders, they're different worldviews, they're different members of our internal team. And each part really wants to be happy, but they really very often have different ideas about how to achieve that. Okay? And whenever we're put in a stressful situation, whenever we're trying to make a somewhat difficult decision, we have the experience of that internal multiplicity. And so a friend asks me, hey, how do you like my haircut? All right? Now, I have a value about honesty, and I have another value about kindness. And inside my head, honesty and kindness are having a conversation about which one gets to hold the microphone. Isn't that real? Okay? And that's just simple example, right? If we're like, wow, should you accept that job? Should you stay in this relationship? Should I move to New York City? You know, it's like all of these things are going to have like a lot of different stakeholders. And most people, very often I see people and they come to me with a lot of distress about something. And I start talking with them about this, and they bounce really, really fast from one perspective to another. They'll be saying, like, this is the problem here, right? And they'll be saying, well, you know, da-da-da-da-da, and then, you know, and in one sentence, they'll go to 4 different subpersonalities. Oddly enough, they feel confused and somewhat lost, right? And so we slow that down and we say, oh, okay, you know, each part wants to be happy, each part is legitimate, but we have to like, oh, from this perspective, this stakeholder thinks this is the correct thing to do. And then this stakeholder has a completely different view. And they're all legitimate. All right? Any of you ever had like a really good coach, like sports coach? Okay? So the idea with, like, particularly if you were on a team where you had the coach, right? The coach's job is to make sure that everybody is honored. Everybody on the team is honored and can contribute to the goal of the team. That's the internal relationship we want to have. We don't want to have a situation where this point of view is scornful about this point of view, which is what is typical. Right? Very ineffective operating system. And next. So I also want to talk about attachment style. This is another one of those deep pieces of software. Attachment style is based on what you learned about the safety of your relationship with your primary caregivers when you were very little. And it's about whether you feel safe with other people and whether you feel safe by yourself. Okay? And so it's this. These are the psychobabble words. Okay? And so here, this is secure attachment. So secure attachment, I feel safe with myself. I feel like, hey, you know, I'm a reasonably sane human being. I can understand why I do what I do and all that. And other people are reasonably sane human beings. And I understand why they do what they do. Right? So I can be securely attached. I can be really relaxed. This situation here, they call it a negative view of others and self. Okay, that's the psychobabble again. Okay, but it's about trust. I don't trust others, and I don't trust myself. Shit. That is not a good situation. I don't feel safe alone, and I don't feel safe with other people. I don't feel safe anywhere in my life. Then we have this position here, which is the negative view of others, positive view of self, safe with myself, not safe with others, self-reliant. All right? That's English. Psychobabble, English. All right? So this word dismissive and avoidant, I mean, they're useful words, but it's basically about like, hey, I feel safer by myself than I do with other people. Because of the way personally I was raised, I feel safer by myself a lot than with other people. Okay? The place where I get to relax the most is if I'm out in the woods, someplace where I can see the approaches. Right? At the top of a mountain where I can see the approaches. Then I can really relax. Okay? And then this is negative view of self, but a positive view of others. And that leads to dependence. Okay, here, anxious, preoccupied attachment, we're just worried about where the other person is, And but it's like, oh, I want to calm down. Do I calm down by going to my mountain top? Do I calm down by snuggling with someone? Am I just fine, or am I in hell? All right? Now, again, if we're thinking about this in terms of subpersonalities, which is the more accurate way to think about it, I have subpersonalities who are secure. There are times and places where I'm just like, hey, I'm good, And then something happens and I get really self-reliant. Or something else happens and it's like, oh my gosh, and I go to my wife and I say, could you please hold me? Because I'm just like so anxious and I can't calm myself down. Or I'm just like, oh, everybody sucks and I suck too, and I'm just gonna, which is terrible, right? But almost everybody has all of these subpersonalities. So we just want to be so kind with ourselves about that. Yeah, Missy, one last one. So I'm laying a whole bunch of different stuff on you, right? But this is about self-understanding. If we're going to upgrade our operating system, we really have to understand how we work. And I mentioned this before. We have a preferred learning style. And let me connect it to what I said before. I mentioned this to you before in terms of we think in our five senses. And we think primarily, some people think with smell and taste, right? It's like there's something that smells fishy here, or that gives me a rotten taste in my mouth, or like that. But mostly we think audially, I like the sound of that. We think visually, that's looking good to me. We think kinesthetically, that gives me a good feeling, I feel good about that. Right? And it's helpful to identify how your brain tends to work. Subpersonalities, again, it's not 100%, but there are people who are clearly more visually oriented than other people who are clearly more audially oriented, where they learn better through sound. This is one of the reasons that here, we're doing visual and auditory, right? Okay? And so not a lot on the kinesthetic because, it's hard to videotape all of you like doing your qigong, but it's like that's an important part of this. And I think in those languages, and I learn in those languages. The more that you can match the way that my language works by default, the more you can get your message across to me. Okay? I listen to a lot of audio tapes, books on tape and like that, and it's just, if it's important, I have to see it. I just cannot take the information in if it's just an audio tape. All right? So it's good for me to know that. I got to go, oh, wow, that was a really good book. I've got to go out and buy that so I can see the charts. So otherwise I'm toast and I just lose it. Good? Next. Submodalities. This is a part of those senses. And I studied a lot of neurolinguistic programming. NLP really focuses a lot on the sensory modalities and the submodalities. Submodalities are modifications in the details of your representational style. The representational style is audio, visual, kinesthetic. Okay, so when I think about my, I think about like a fabulous Thanksgiving feast. There's smells and tastes and then visuals about that, all the people that were there, right? Not a lot of audio track for me, some kinesthetic, right? When I think about like going to the beach, it's like, oh, there's a lot of kinesthetic there. There's a lot of sand and and audio track of the waves and the birds, right? So different memories you can see the different the representational systems that you use for those, and then the modification in the details are what make the thought or the memory meaningful. And this is just it's got so much power in it. If you understand this, it's got huge amounts of power in it. All right? The more lifelike your thinking is, the more memorable it is. All right? It just has more emotional impact. The more emotional impact something has, the more memorable it is. And so in terms of audio, that's about volume and tone. In terms of visual, it's like, oh, is it black and white? Is it moving? Are you seeing through your own eyeballs, or are you a fly on the wall perspective, right? If it's kinesthetic, is this pleasant, unpleasant, hard, or soft? Run a little experiment for me here, okay? Take a pleasant memory. So something that was nice. Maybe you were walking in the sunshine. Maybe you saw some beautiful flowers. Maybe you had a sweet connection with someone that you love, or a good meal, or like that. Just choose something that is a positive memory. Yes? Okay, cool. Okay, so you've got a positive memory. Now make it more lifelike. In your imagination, deliberately make it more vivid. And feel how, if you do that, you make sure you're seeing through your own eyeballs, you make sure that it's sense around, you make sure that it's vivid and the sound is good and all of that. As you do that, it has more emotional impact, doesn't it? It's like, ooh, it gets juicier. You get to like, get into the details of that, and it's just so yummy and delicious. Yes? Right? So you remember the brain has a negative bias. What that means is the brain stores negative memories in a lifelike way. And the brain naturally stores positive memories in a kind of way. I mean, it does, right? It's not your problem. It's like it's hardware, right? However, because it's hardware and you know that that's what the brain does naturally, you can intervene. You can say, hey, actually, that dreadful memory that I have, I think I want to make it less lifelike. And I'm going to systematically make it less lifelike. I'm going to put it as instead of like through my own eyeballs sense around, I'm going to put it on a television. And then I'm going to say, oh, well, it was actually a DVD. And so I'm going to pop out the DVD and I'm going to put the DVD in a box. And the box is just going to have this narrow little spine. And I'm going to put it in a bookcase. It's still retrievable, right? But it's not running in the background all the time with sense around, right? Instead, it's on a shelf. And if you do that again and again and again and again, that's actually, your brain gets it and goes, wow, this is unimportant. He wants to store it as a DVD. Okay. Because the brain just doesn't have an opinion about it, right? But I have to repeat it. And I have to do it in my brain's natural language. I can't say, don't think about that. Not going to work. Next. Okay, so thoughts. In general, thoughts are just, it's so useful to just recognize that thoughts are sensory hallucinations. right? They're just sensory hallucinations. Okay, they're coded in your representational systems, so they're visual, auditory, kinesthetic. They're always about the past or the future, right? We don't have thoughts about the present moment. They're always about the past or the future. Even if you think you're having a thought about the present moment, it was actually in the past, right? We never have thoughts about the present moment. We only have thoughts about the past or the future. They're really useful, but we don't have to think as much as we do. It's a habit, okay? And the thing is that the mind really can't tell the difference between what's real and what you vividly imagine. And so if you have a really, really vivid thought about the world, I mean, some people have these really, really vivid thoughts about how they have to be like massively protective and scared about immigrants, for instance. Oh, excuse me. Right? And so they like, I don't want to tread too far into politics there, but you know, it's just the mind can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not. So it's really helpful if we actually tell ourselves true stories instead of BS. Right? And these days, of course, it's really helpful if we're very careful about our news feed, because false news is going to fry our thinking, and we're going to start acting as if that BS is true. Just real, right? And next. So when we think about our beliefs are really complexes of thoughts, right? They're like this whole like construction of various different thoughts. And they're about ourselves and others and the world. I loved this image. This is like a flat earth image, right? It's like there's nothing over there, right? It's turtles all the way down underneath that. Right? So, but you know, there are people who actually believe stuff like that. It's not helpful. So, and many of these beliefs, they're implicit. That is to say, they're operating below the level of consciousness. They're powerful even if they're totally inaccurate. And if we really want to just be pragmatic about this, what we want beliefs that increase our efficacy. So that when we're looking at whether we believe this or we believe that, the real question is, does this help me perform my life? Does it lead to joy? I would like to have beliefs that lead to joy and that make me effective in my life. So I'm noticing that it's like, 10 after 8? Oh my goodness. So let's on to the next.
You're fine.
Okay. Am I fine? Are you guys doing okay? Great. Okay. So I just wanted to mention irrational beliefs and cognitive distortions. So irrational beliefs are inaccurate beliefs and thoughts, and they really can be crippling. These are about like these issues of success, love, belonging, self-worth, all that kind of stuff. And if you have the belief, or you have a subpersonality who has the belief that, oh, I'm not good enough because I'm incompetent, oh, I'm not lovable enough, oh, I'm unwanted or different, I don't fit in. This is one that I fall into a fair amount just because of my history. Defective, imperfect, powerless, you know, right? If you really believe these, or you get identified with the subpersonality who believes those, you can really ruin your day, can't you? Right? So they're inaccurate beliefs, they're inaccurate thoughts. And again, if we're upgrading our operating system, we have to like pay attention. Oh, here's this subpersonality who's getting stuck in one of these irrational thoughts or beliefs again. Or the next one, Another way of framing it is as cognitive distortions. And this is from David Burns, the founder of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and like that. Wrote wonderful books on depression and how to handle that. And you know, detailed all of these different kinds of cognitive distortions. This is a searchable term. You can take tests online that give you like, oh, do I engage your all or nothing thinking? You know? So it's really useful to just look at this, because if you get stuck in this stuff, or your subpersonalities get stuck in this stuff, it can really take you for a loop. Because we can't tell if these beliefs are real or not real. We start to operate as if they're real. Not useful. And the next. Another software is our values, right? And values are simply the qualities that are really important to you. And different subpersonalities, like I was saying about honesty versus kindness, different subpersonalities are stakeholders for different values. Now, and our values have a hierarchy. And if you don't know the hierarchy of your values, that's going to be a little bit of a problem, right? You don't have a really refined level of understanding. And so some value-oriented thing comes fleeting across your mind or passes through the flashlight of your attention, and you can't identify it because you don't know the hierarchy of your values. Honesty, kindness, you know? Kindness, I'm for kindness. Okay? Honesty is close, but kindness wins. Okay? Which is not right, you know? It's just my values. Okay? Next. And then we come to our self-management style. And this is my book, Transforming Your Inner Critic into an Inner Coach. So that's applied self-compassion. And it's a workbook. Highly recommended if you're interested in this area. And it's really a question of like, do you manage yourself with harshness and criticism or with compassion and patience? And so here I am, I'm going along, I'm having the difficult experience of being alive. I don't know if you've noticed this, but life is hard. It is impossible to live and have your life not be challenging. Well, that would have been really helpful to understand when I was 16, you know? Because I thought it was challenging just because I was so incompetent at the time, all right? But no, it turns out that life is challenging for everybody, and there's no way to get past that, all right? And so it's so helpful if you manage yourself with kindness and compassion. It's just like, you know, we're doing our best here. This is hard, you know? And then we're all going to age and die. It's like, oh my gosh. Right? Next. Okay, so this was all about this key 2, self-understanding and mindfulness. And we want to understand the contents of our awareness, so that we can predict what's going to show up, so that we can manage ourselves more effectively. Okay? And if we're going to upgrade our operating system, we have to understand what the operating system is and what the elements are. Okay? Next. So when we do this, when we're talking about our self-management, we can do things from the top down or the bottom up. Top down, cognitive, deliberate self-talk, visualization, working with submodalities, talking to my subpersonalities, doing all of that stuff, very cognitive, okay? If you rate your level of arousal or distress on a scale of 1 to 10, so 10 is really distressed. For most people, 1 to 5, they can do a top-down. So you're getting off center, and you can do some intervention that gets you back on track. But for most people, again, If you're too upset, you have to do a bottom-up intervention. You have to change your physiology. You have to intervene with your breath. You have to intervene with your physical tension patterns, with your posture, and your heart rate. Okay? And you have to take care of your key one. Diet, sleep, exercise, social contact, daily relaxation, avoiding addictions, all that good stuff. Okay? But it's like, oh, I'm too upset? I'd better breathe. Oh, I'm not that upset? Maybe I'll be able to talk to myself in a way that keeps me on track. Okay? And next. So ideally, as I'm going through my life, I would like to be centered. And when I think about being centered, I want a relaxed yet focused state of mind. Okay? I want to be situationally aware and responsive to what's going on. And I want to have a calm and aligned body. No excess tension. If I'm relaxed, I function better. If I'm relaxed, I respond better. And I want to have this attitude of Cole: curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. And I'd like to be centered all the time. All right? And next. So this is it's pretty simple centering method, and I just want to mention it to you. It's once. Once is, it's what is that, an acronym?
An acronym.
Yeah? So orient through your 5 senses to the present moment. Notice the contents of your awareness. Bring compassion to all of your experience. And then deliberately choose how you're going to bring your energy to the present moment. Again and again and again and again and again and again and again, right? Next. So I think about this as like I'm driving down the freeway. So I drive down the freeway, I'm trying to stay in my lane, my hands are like this, right? They're like doing these little micro adjustments. Ideally my hands are actually on my steering wheel, right? And in order to keep myself at peak performance, in order to keep myself in my lane with an eye on my chosen destination and a hand on my steering wheel, I want to macro-manage myself. Micromanaging is, Nando, you didn't do this. Nando, you're over time. Whoa, you thought this was going to be an hour, and look, it's 8:20, and people are getting restless, right? So that's micromanaging. Macro-managing is breathe, stay centered, stay relaxed, stay comfortable. Keep refining your course, all right? We want to pay attention to macro-managing, not micromanaging. And next. Okay, so we are coming to the end here. And what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're practicing the skills that lead to personal effectiveness. We're practicing our mindfulness. We're practicing staying centered. We're practicing making specific plans. And we're practicing treating ourselves with compassion. And again, it's like life is going to be hard. Loss is there, right? So it's not like, oh, if I practice this, I'm going to be peachy, right? It's if I practice this, I'm going to be able to deal better with the challenges in my life. And so if I practice my mindfulness and staying centered and making my plans and bringing compassion to myself. Good? Okay, next. So I really recommend that, like as I mentioned, I've got these wheels. This is an opportunity to just introspect and do a self-assessment, and then it's got a write-up about it on the back. Or actually, that's the front. But decide on the changes that you want to make in your life. Oh, wow, if I upgraded my thoughts, if I busted myself on my cognitive distortions, would that be a good idea? Do I want to manage my emotions and moods better? Do I want to manage my behavior? Is there any way that I'm just like really acting out? Are my beliefs a little wonky in places? Do I know what the prioritization of my values are? What is my self-management style? Do I treat myself with loving kindness and compassion? Or am I just like the world's harshest on myself. Next. Now, change is much, much easier with a buddy. Any of you scuba dive? I scuba dive, and so it's like scuba diving, it's a little, washed out, but it's always much better to scuba dive with a buddy, right? No scuba diving alone. Right? And once you have a plan for the change you want to make, then you share it with a buddy. You share it with someone who's going to keep you accountable and be interested in your well-being. So I go to my wife Sharon and I say, "Oh, well, I'm gonna do this thing." And she says, "Well, Nando, did you do that thing yesterday?" Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? Next. And change is even easier if you have an experienced coach. All right? So if you want deep and lasting changes, it's best to get expert guidance. I mean, it just is. All right? So we know that, right? If I want to play the violin, I go and I find someone who plays the violin and knows how to teach playing the violin, and I work with the coach. It's like, all right? And next. Okay, so thank you all very much for your kind attention and your patience with this. I hope you found it really useful. This is the end of our PowerPoint. I would be delighted to have some conversation, to present some ways of working with things if you're interested in hanging out. As Shady was saying, we're able to be here until 9, right? And so we have a little bit more time. I don't have to go anywhere. And so thank you for your kind attention again. And I think that's the last slide. Can we just check?
Yes.
Yep, that's the last one. Okay, thank you all very much. Cool.
Are you
Yeah.
going to take questions?
Yeah.
So you said that with bad memories or something like that, that you systematically make it less lifelike?
Yes.
I lost how you do that.
Okay, so let's say that you have a bad memory. Okay, so we just choose a bad memory. Any of you could choose a bad memory if you wanted to. And we go, okay, well, this particular bad memory, is it more visual? Is it more audio? Or is it more kinesthetic?
Visual.
It's more visual. Okay. So that means like lifelike is this, right? It's through my own eyeballs. It's vivid. It's color. It's moving, right? And if I want to change we call it submodalities. If I want to change the submodalities, well, I can make it black and white. Oh, okay, so take that memory in your imagination and just make it black and white. Take that memory in your imagination and take it and put it on a television. We used to have black and white TVs, right? We just take it and we put it on a black and white TV. And in the process of taking it and putting it on a black and white TV, we also changed point of view, right? So if it was through your own eyeballs before, now you're looking at it, yeah? Right? Less lifelike.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, help yourself to one of these. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you want to be on my mailing list, this is a sign-in sheet, and then I'll send you stuff if you want. Okay? Hey, yeah, man. Thanks for coming.
See you Thursday.
Yeah, grab one of these. So does that make sense?
Yes.
So we make it less lifelike. And it's like, oh, okay, so what's the epitome of a visual less lifelike? Well, black and white photograph that maybe, you remember those little tiny, passport type, okay? So we take and we put the memory on a black and white photograph, and then we pixelate it, right? And then we right? I mean, we can do anything that we want. But the message that we're giving our brain is, because this is less lifelike, it is less important. Okay? Now, what's going to happen for most people as they play with this sort of thing is there are going to be some memories where you do that once and it's done. Never have to do it again. And then there are going to be other memories where it's like, boom, it's lifelike again, right? And so you do it again. Your brain didn't quite get the message. So you do it again, and you're just like, oh, okay, I went through this whole operation, I'm just going to go through that operation again. And then, boom, it falls off the shelf, and you just do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And eventually it stays that way, which is so cool. Yeah, Beth?
A question about how the brain actually works in a situation like that. Like, the way you described it is kind of gradual, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But like I ran one in my head and I stuck it on the TV because you suggested that. And then I just turned the TV off. And so, and you know, I feel like, does the brain work in such a way that, you know, it'll come back again,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll put it on the TV and I'll freaking turn the TV off, you know, again
Awesome.
and again.
Awesome, and if you do
And so I
that,
didn't know if you had to be more gradual.
no, just go as fast as your body can handle, as your brain handles. Just turn it off, right? But just anticipate that what we're trying to do is we're trying to send a message to the brain in its own language, right? Because this is in the language that the brain actually works in, is in these images. And I'm manipulating it. I'm connecting with my brain, the way that my brain works, and I'm manipulating it in that language, and I don't know how many times I'm going to have to repeat it until the brain gets it. I just don't know.
Right.
But I know that if I do it again and again and again, the brain will get it. I just don't know how many times I'll have to do it. Yeah.
What are some examples that's more physical and not a visual?
Okay, so let's say that you have something that what? Like more physical, it makes you sick to your stomach when you think about this?
Yeah, or can't breathe.
Or can't breathe, or like that? Okay, so then it's like, do you have memories of like being in incredibly beautiful places where you felt really connected and warm, and you were able to breathe in a really sweet and wonderful way? Remember that? Okay, cool. One of the things about breath is that any of you ever gotten anxious so that you felt like you couldn't get a full breath?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you'll notice that issue is always on the inhale. Okay, it's not, oh, I can't exhale, right? It's, oh, I can't get a full breath, I can't inhale. We can always exhale. Okay, so if you ever have an anxious moment and you're like, oh, I can't get a deep breath, just exhale. The reason you can't get a deep breath is you aren't exhaling. So you just exhale. Okay?
The inhale is more of like a flight, fright kind of response, right? And then
Well, can I give you the whole wrap on this? Okay, you got patience for the whole wrap on your breath?
Yes.
Okay, so if we're going to intervene bottom up, we're going to intervene with our breath, okay? That's the first intervention. So run an experiment with me, okay? We're going to do what I call triangular breathing. Triangular breathing, you inhale for as long as you inhale, but then you exhale for longer. And then at the end of the exhale, you hold your breath. Okay? So you inhale for as long as you inhale, you exhale for longer, and then you hold your breath. And when you hold your breath, well, down here at this corner here, you exhale and do a crunch. Okay? So in order to fully exhale, if I may, when I fully exhale, right? That's the posture. If I don't do that posture, I'm not actually getting all of my breath out. All right? So if I don't bring the bottom of my rib cage close to the diaphragm goes here, if I don't bring the bottom of my rib cage close to my lumbar spine, I will not empty all of the air out of my system. Okay? So when I exhale and when I want to use my breath to influence my state of consciousness in a calming, centering kind of way, I exhale strongly with a crunch. So it totally gets all the air out. And then when I inhale, right, I stack the breath back up again. All right, and the breath stacks up like that, and it drains like this. Okay, so now we do a before picture and we go, hey, how am I doing? How's my mental clarity? How's my state of arousal? How's my sleepiness? How's my, alertness? How's all of that working? And then we're going to take these 3 deep breaths. Okay, just 3 of them. And when I say deep, I mean this part, the exhale. 3 deep exhales. Okay, you with me? We'll all be breathing at our own pace, but we take a nice inhalation, and then when we exhale, as you squeeze at the bottom of the exhale, actually do some work. And then we just take our after picture. We go, wow, how am I doing now? Pretty good. Yeah? Pretty good? Okay? So now what happens for most people is they're going through their life and they get uptight about this or they get uptight about that, and their breathing shuts down and they breathe shallowly, right? And mental chatter increases when you don't have enough oxygen in your system. And so they've got a lot of mental chatter, and then they've got like shallow breathing, and then they feel anxious and weird, and it's difficult, and it's just like, okay, intervene with your breath. Hands on the steering wheel. How's my breathing? All right? So when you're working with a memory that starts to bring up some shortness of breath, then we go, oh, well, let me consider that as I breathe deeply, as I take charge of my breathing. And that will, again, it's like you're changing the submodalities. You're changing your visceral experience of the memory. And it tells your brain, I don't have to hold my breath while I think about this. I can have this memory and breathe fully. I'm fine. Good?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool.
Thank
Yeah,
Do you
David.
do any past life work?
I don't, but it's in my worldview.
Yeah.
Like I've done some past life stuff as a client, and like had some pretty interesting experiences. But I find that it's unnecessary. And really, the thing is that when I first got into this business, I thought that I was trying to help people no longer have suffering in their lives. Right? So I'm not, I don't have that job description anymore. My job description now is let me help people like manage themselves so that they can deal with the suffering in their lives, which is such an easier job description for me because it's like it's realistic. It's actually possible. Right?
What's LPC?
LPC is licensed professional counselor. So that's the license with the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, Helga.
When you speak of negative memories, for me it's a lot of dialogue and arguing with a particular person and a situation, and that it has not had a response, and they are not going to let me go back and forth.
And let's say that you wanted to feel better about that. Would that be okay?
Sometimes I avoid that person.
Yeah, that would be one strategy, but let's say that you wanted to feel better about it just in an ongoing way. I mean, there's an audio memory, yeah? Right? And so we want to take that audio memory and go, oh, well, how relevant is this? My brain is treating this as if it's really relevant because I'm perseverating on it. Right? But actually, how relevant is it? How, like, it's like, here's this argument that I had with this person. Do I really want that to ruin my day? Here's this thing, this conversation I had with my dad like 30 years ago. Do I really want to be perseverating on that conversation? My dad's dead. It's like, so we want to be able to take charge of how we're processing that stuff. And with an audio track, we know how to do that, right? You have an audio track, you speed it up, you increase the amount of noise, you decrease the signal, you make it lower, you make it so it's like speaking like Daffy Duck, wah, 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 or like Charlie Brown's teachers or parents, wah, 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 or whatever, right? But we manipulate it so that we have control and influence over it. If you don't take charge of these disturbing memories, of these thoughts, these disturbing thoughts, they will run in the background, won't they? And they will just like, How is that useful? Yeah, you want something?
I'm sort of got caught between kind of reducing and resolving bad experiences or bad memories.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of something that's more current, but I also have other ones that feel like what I've done at the time is to not process them, to not feel them. And I'm very good at that. I can just, right, and it'll come up and come up again. Or in the current run that I'm sort of dealing with still has to do with family ramifications, major actions that I need to take. That will be, to not put myself in certain situations, to resolve it in action. And kind of, you could go either way, but I don't think that just calming something or eliminating it is necessarily the strongest position to take.
Right, absolutely. And there's some situations where, we're talking about something that's in the past, and then it's like, well, do I really want this memory to occupy brain space anymore? Have I learned everything that I possibly can from this memory? And if I have, then I should put it on the television and turn it off. Right? There's no point in having it just there. And so I want to tell my brain, this is not actually all that relevant anymore. But there are other times where the feeling is, no, hey, wait a minute, if I burn that memory, if I actually forgot that, or I had it at a lower scale of intensity, that actually wouldn't be so good, because I actually still need to process it, or I still need to learn something from it, or it's still relevant. I work with some people where they have like an interaction with a specific person, where that person has proven themselves to be untrustworthy, for example. And so they have a memory of the betrayal of that person being untrustworthy. And if they were to turn that into a zero, like no longer have any affect, no longer have any distress about it, well, they might do something stupid, like get into interaction with that person again, think that they were going to be a reasonable person. And so there's some situations where it's actually really useful to remain wary, right? Now, so I remain wary of and very respectful of black widow spiders. It doesn't mean that I run screaming from the room when I see a black widow spider. It means that I go, oh, look, a black widow spider. Oh, okay, what are we going to do about that? Right? So it's like, I don't want to like lose the file that says that black widow spiders are potentially dangerous. I don't want to lose the file that tells me, oh, you know, this person is not to be trusted. But I also don't want to run screaming from the room when I see that person. I want to go, oh, well, you know, or maybe I do, right? but you know, it's like, it's again, it's about your self-management choices, about like, okay, what do you feel is appropriate and what's consistent with your scale of values? Does that address that a bit?
Yeah, one thing I would add is that when I get something that keeps coming back, it usually means that something needs to be adjusted.
Yes.
And once it is, it usually disappears.
Right. Right. And it, you know, different people's lives are different about this, but in my life, it does really seem like the universe is trying to teach me some lessons. And stuff keeps coming back if I don't get it. And you know, I don't know if there's like a plan, right? Or if it just like seems like there's a plan, but it's like, you know, it's pretty bizarre the way that this stuff keeps showing up in my life.